What if I told you that today, the most humble person in a room was the only one capable of changing her own destiny? On an ordinary afternoon in Macon, while everyone competed for appearances, one quiet young woman carried something no one there seemed to see: courage. Have you ever imagined being judged, ridiculed, and still standing tall, holding only your faith? In this story, what seemed like just another interview turns into a twist that exposes the worst and the best in people. Get ready. Not everyone will leave this room unscathed. Here, those with borrowed brilliance will crumble, and those who carry true light will finally be seen. A CEO in disguise, a silent test, and a choice that could change two worlds. You'll understand why sometimes the real transformation lives in the invisible. While some try to stand out by what they wear, others shine by what they carry in their souls. Amelia Carter, a woman who has been invisible so many times in life, decides to place her bet on silent faith to find what neither resumes nor practiced smiles can reveal. In an environment saturated with arrogance and disdain, she finds a young woman who barely dared to lift her eyes, but who deep down carried more strength than all the others combined. What happens next will make you rethink everything you think you know about success, appearance, and value. This story will hurt those who have ever felt invisible, but it will also ignite hope for those who never gave up. Because in the end, the deepest victories make no noise, they happen in silence. And today you're going to hear a story that many try to silence, but it deserves to be told. And the question is, will you manage to leave it without being moved? Don't be fooled. This story is not about luck. It's about resilience, about silent promises that span generations. It's about the power that is born when no one else believes, but you choose to believe anyway. You'll see masks fall, secrets revealed, and destinies turned upside down before a watchful eye. And in the end, maybe you'll realize that your own life also has forgotten promises, waiting to be reignited. So stay with me, because what happens now is not just a hiring. It's a reunion with everything the world tries to make you forget. And you can bet, after today, you'll never look at courage the same way again. Before diving into this exciting story, we want to make sure you don't miss out on any of our incredible content. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, now is the perfect time to do so. By subscribing, you'll become a valued member of our growing community, where we share amazing stories, insightful lessons, and much more. Don't wait any longer. Hit that subscribe button now and join us on this amazing journey. The humid heat of Macon seemed to stick to the skin as Amelia Carter stepped out of the taxi. Dark jeans, a simple blouse, her hair pulled back into a discreet bun. Nothing about her revealed the powerful woman she truly was. She carried only a worn-out briefcase in her hands and an attentive, though calm, gaze. The Lumina Enterprises branch building stood before her, modest, with faded golden letters promising to transform talents, illuminate futures. Inside the waiting room, the contrast was almost glaring. Young women in designer clothes adjusted their expensive bags on their laps, exchanging impatient glances and empty smiles. Expensive perfumes saturated the stifling air. In the far corner, one figure stood out, Elisa Montgomery. She wore a worn navy blue dress, well-polished but old shoes, and between her nervous fingers, she quietly spun a small silver crucifix, as though silently drawing prayers in the air. Amelia sat in an empty chair, 2 seats away from the main group. She pretended to review some old papers, while her eyes swept across the room. Every detail seemed to scream louder than any words: the forced laughter of the candidates, Elisa's suppressed sigh, the muffled sound of the old television in the corner. Here the real test had already begun, and it wasn't about resumes or technical skills. The conversation started between the young women initially seemed trivial, but the poison lay in the subtext. Subtle judgments about appearances, venomous comments about accents, tips cloaked in contempt. Elisa, small in the corner, tried to shrink further into herself, as if knowing that the world can sometimes be cruel to those who dare to remain invisible. And Amelia, silent, felt a weight growing in her chest. The wall clock ticked slowly and relentlessly, as if the whole room were breathing in sync with its suffocating rhythm. Amelia closed her briefcase slowly and placed her hands on her knees. The first step had been taken, but the real test, both for her and for these young women, was still to come. And what was about to happen there would change more than just a job offer. The uncomfortable silence in the room was soon shattered, like a window pane struck by a stone. The well-dressed young women, one by one, began to strike up conversations, as if casting poisoned bait into the air. They laughed quietly, exchanging whispers sharp as blades. Elisa, sitting at the end, slightly turned her face, trying to protect herself from what she knew was coming. But there was nowhere to escape here. Look at her. Is she lost? One of the candidates said, brushing her straight hair with disdain. The others stifled their laughter. This company is serious, right? It has standards. Another added, looking directly at Elisa as though measuring and discarding her with a single glance. The crucifix around her neck seemed to weigh even more, and her fingers involuntarily pressed it against her chest, as though holding an invisible promise. Amelia observed. The blood boiled inside, but her face remained impassive. Each cruel word was silently recorded. Each snicker echoed like a nail being driven into a door they would later find themselves unable to open. In her mind, old memories flickered. Memories of when she herself had been judged by the color of her skin, by her accent, by the humble origins many had tried to make her feel ashamed of. Elisa kept her eyes lowered, her shoulders hunched, trying to disappear without actually disappearing. The whole room seemed to conspire against her existence, a stage where only those with false glitter received applause. And still, there was in her a raw, silent strength almost invisible, the courage to stay whole even as she was broken into pieces invisible to every passing glance. The clock ticked slowly again. A low hum from the television filled the air, between one stifled laugh and the next. Amelia knew the time was near, and deep inside a certainty blossomed within her. She wouldn't allow this scene to end like so many others the world let slip by unnoticed. Something needed to change. Here, and it would. The question was who would be ready to bear the light. The door to the right creaked as it opened, interrupting the sequence of stifled laughter. A staff member in a simple suit but with a respectful demeanor appeared in the doorway and announced in a clear voice, "Amelia Carter, please follow me." The room fell silent for a moment. The candidates exchanged quick glances, trying to hide their surprise at seeing the simple woman called first. Elisa lifted her eyes, surprised, before quickly lowering them again. Amelia slowly rose, adjusted, the briefcase under her arm, and walked with firm but discreet steps. She felt the weight of inquisitive, judgmental stares on her back. She passed by the young women without diverting her gaze. She chose to focus on the silent promise she had made to herself. Never forget where she came from, nor who she came. With the hallway leading to the main room was narrow, lit by a cold light that accentuated the solitude of the moment. The staff member led her to a set of polished wooden double doors, where a small sign rested, "Interview Room 1." Amelia took a deep breath, adjusted her expression as if donning an invisible armor, and entered the room without hesitation. Meanwhile, in the waiting room, conversations resumed in anxious whispers. The young women whispered to each other, trying to guess the interview criteria, masking their own insecurity with a confidence that was beginning to crumble at the edges. Elisa, however, remained motionless, clutching her crucifix with trembling fingers. For her, the silence felt heavier than any words spoken until then. Inside, Amelia crossed the room calmly. Each step echoed against the sober walls. The central chair, empty, seemed to await her like a silent throne. She sat down, placed the briefcase on the table, and with a slight smile at the corner of her mouth whispered to herself, Time to separate those who shine from those who only reflect borrowed light. And the real interview, though no one there knew it, had already begun. The door opened again, this time to call the first candidate on the list. The silence in the waiting room was shattered by hurried heels and tense smiles. The young woman crossed the hallway with the confident stride of someone who already saw herself as chosen. Little did she know that what awaited her on the other side was something no facade could support. When she entered the room, she froze for a moment. There, at the head of the long table, sat Amelia. No longer the timid candidate from moments ago, but the CEO of Lumina Enterprises. The golden badge on her chest, the serene posture, and the gaze that pierced through layers of pretense like invisible blades. "Please have a seat," Amelia said in a low, firm voice with no trace of polite smiles. The questions came quickly, but none were about her resume. What does respect mean to you? What do you do when no one is watching? What would your colleagues say about your character? The answers came shaky, rehearsed, fragile. It didn't take long for the veneer to crack. Amelia listened, took notes, and at one point slowly closed the notebook. "Thank you for your time. We are not just looking for technical talent. We are looking for something that comes from character. You may leave now." One by one, the candidates were called. And one by one, shock was etched across their faces as they faced Amelia's true position. None of them could sustain the weight of their own reflection in front of a woman who saw beyond polished resumes. The hallway, once full of whispers and arrogance, now echoed with hurried footsteps of those leaving with their pride crumpled between their fingers. In the waiting room, Elisa silently watched the parade of defeated expressions. Her large eyes blinked quickly, as if trying to understand what was happening. And without realizing, her fingers remained clenched around the crucifix, as if, even without understanding, she clung to what doesn't change. Amelia knew the most delicate moment was yet to come, and it would be this moment that would define everything. The atmosphere felt different. The voices that once filled the room had now turned into a dense silence, almost tangible. Elisa felt the air weigh on her fragile shoulders, as if the very ground beneath her feet might give way. She was the last, the only one left, and deep down she feared she was just another to be discarded, without even having had the chance to show who she truly was. The interview room door creaked once more, and the staff member, now with a respectful expression, announced her name. "Elisa Montgomery, please." The young woman stood slowly, adjusting the worn dress with trembling hands. The crucifix swayed gently on her chest, casting small silver reflections across the grey room. Each step toward the door seemed like a silent test of courage. The hallway, once a stage for hurried footsteps, now seemed like an endless tunnel. Elisa walked with her head down, her gaze fixed on the floor, as if fearing judgment in every crack of the walls. But there was something different in the air, as if fate, tired of waiting, had decided to stop the clock just to watch her walk. Upon entering the room, Elisa hesitated, pausing before the slightly open door. Amelia waited there, seated at the head of the table, with the evening light casting golden shadows on her steady face. There were no easy smiles or impatient stares, just a serene presence that invited, without words, her to be true. Elisa took a deep breath and stepped into the space, every cell in her body screaming to resist the fear. The silence between them was dense, laden with meaning. Amelia lifted her head, crossed her fingers on the table, and with a slight smile, that seemed like a gesture of welcome, motioned toward the chair in front of her. No words had been spoken yet, but in that moment, both knew. This was not just an interview. It was a meeting between two souls that had learned to survive in a world that didn't always know how to see what truly mattered. Elisa sat in the chair facing Amelia, nervously adjusting the hem of her dress over her knees. Her eyes hesitated to rise, as if the very act of being seen was an audacity. Amelia maintained a steady yet welcoming gaze, patiently waiting for the young woman to find her own rhythm. Outside, the sun began to dip behind the old buildings of Macon, painting the sky with shades of orange and gold. The first question came without formalities. "Tell me about yourself, Elisa." Amelia's voice was calm, devoid of the usual coldness of corporate interviews. Elisa, hesitant, touched her crucifix with the tips of her fingers before she began to speak, as though seeking strength in its roots. She spoke about the grandmother who had raised her with firm hands and a tender heart, about the humble jobs she had taken to pay for her studies, about the sleepless nights, balancing books with hard work. Each word was spoken with raw simplicity, without adornments or flourishes. She spoke of pain without victimizing herself, of faith without preaching, of hope without promising miracles. She spoke as one who carried invisible scars, yet refused to let them define her. And in every brief pause, in every silence between the phrases, there was a dignity so pure it seemed to illuminate the small crucifix around her neck. Amelia felt a lump form in her throat. She recognized that strength. It was the same strength that had sustained her own journey, so often in silence, so often invisible to eyes that only saw superficial shine. The clock marked time, but in that room, it seemed that only the hearts of the two women were beating, in a slow, deep rhythm, as if they were stitching together a new story. When Elisa finished speaking, she lowered her eyes, as if apologizing for having exposed herself. But Amelia didn't respond immediately. She let the silence grow like a silent prayer, respecting the weight and beauty of simplicity. And in that space between words, Elisa felt, perhaps for the first time in a long time, that she was seen, not for what she lacked, but for what was most true inside her. Amelia slowly closed the notebook, pushing it aside as if completing a ritual. Elisa, still with her hands clasped in her lap, waited, her heart pounding so loudly it seemed to fill the entire silence of the room. Outside, the last golden ray of the day passed through the window, shyly illuminating the small crucifix resting on her tired yet proud chest. Without rising immediately, Amelia leaned slightly forward, her eyes steady, but filled with a tenderness hard to conceal. "Elisa," she began, her voice choked by what seemed like a distant memory. "Sometimes the world tries to convince us that we need to be loud to be seen, but there's a strength that is born in silence, a light that doesn't need spotlights." She then stood up, crossing the room with slow steps, each one heavy with meaning. She stopped in front of Elisa, and with a gesture that combined formality and deep respect, extended her hands. Elisa hesitated, surprised, but then stood up, holding Amelia's hands with trembling fingers. The CEO gently squeezed the young woman's hands and declared, in a tone that carried faith, promise, and redemption, "You represent everything Lumina Enterprises stands for. From today on, Elisa Montgomery, you are part of our family." The impact of the words took a second to reach Elisa. Her eyes widened, then filled with tears she couldn't control. The tears fell silently, sliding down her cheeks without a sound, as if all the pain, all the hope, all the scars she had carried up until then had finally found shelter. The crucifix glowed again under the weak light, like a small stubborn beacon in the vastness of the world. Amelia, feeling the sacred weight of that moment, said nothing more. She simply enveloped Elisa in a discreet yet firm embrace, one that heals without promising, one that recognizes without needing to explain. And in that silent gesture, they sealed not just a new professional journey, but the certainty that true light always, somehow, finds those who refuse to extinguish their own flame. The sky over Macon turned a deep blue as Elisa crossed the door of the interview room, no longer as an invisible candidate, but as a chosen one. Her steps, still hesitant, now carried a new lightness, as if she had just discovered that she belonged somewhere for the first time. In the hallway, Some employees glanced at her with discreet respect, smiling sincerely, unlike the looks that had pierced her earlier that day. At the reception, Elisa received her temporary badge from the hands of an assistant who, unaware of the whole story, simply said, "Welcome to Lumina." It was simple. It was enough. She held the badge as one would hold a silent trophy, knowing that true victories are not wrapped in applause, but in small gestures of recognition. The crucifix on her chest seemed lighter now, as if it were glowing from within. Amelia watched everything from a distance, discreetly leaning against one of the reception columns. Her eyes scanned the scene with the serenity of someone who knew that every small choice, every act of silent courage was a seed planted in fertile soil. She didn't need to say anything. Her mission there was complete. Still inside, she gave thanks, not just for the present, but for all the silent battles that had brought her here. Elisa crossed the reception with small but determined steps. She received warm looks from her new colleagues, some still surprised, others already admiring. It wasn't about appearance nor about perfection. It was about essence. And in that space, so full of promises and invisible scars, she found for the first time the chance to bloom without needing to hide who she was. Outside, Amelia pulled open the glass door, feeling the cool night air brush against her face. She looked up at the dark sky speckled with stars and allowed herself a quiet smile. One of those smiles only those who have crossed deserts can understand. Deep down, she knew her fight would never be fully won. But on that day, in that small corner of the world, she had won a victory that was worth more than any number or recognition. The victory of not letting the light go out. Life won't always offer us audiences, applause, or clear signs that we're on the right path. Sometimes, our light will shine in silence while the entire world seems too busy to notice. But in the end, it's not the opinion of others that defines our worth. It's the courage to keep being who we are even when no one is watching. Amelia knew this. Elisa did too. And maybe now, you do as well. The greatest transformations begin in the small, silent, invisible daily choices, but full of faith. Think about it. How many times have you stopped believing in yourself just because someone didn't see your value? How many dreams did you shelve, thinking that simplicity was a flaw, not a strength? Today, Elisa and Amelia's story reminds us that it's in the middle of rejections, sideways glances, and hasty judgments that true light is revealed, and that there is a kind of strength no appearance can imitate. The question is, will you choose to carry that light? Even when the world tries to extinguish it, let this story be a living reminder that dignity, faith, and silent courage are still the greatest achievements someone can have. And that sometimes the greatest miracle is simply continuing to believe, even when everything seems to say otherwise. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to our channel, activate the bell, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Because true transformation begins in the silence that no one sees, but that changes everything.